The morning doors of Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, Mississippi are open right now. As we speak, a community is quietly filing into the pews, walking past a family that has spent the last 16 days enduring a type of agonizing, hyper-visible limbo that no parent should ever have to experience. The visitation is underway this Monday morning, July 20th, 2026, and the formal service is rapidly approaching. For over 2 weeks, this family has dreaded the arrival of today, but as they step into that sanctuary to begin the process of laying 18-year-old Nolan Wells to rest, they are not permitted the simple, quiet space of private mourning. Instead, they walk into that church carrying the crushing weight of a sprawling, multi-layered federal and local crisis that has broken wide open over the past 72 hours. There are 4 major high-stakes developments converging on this case at the exact same moment the family is trying to say their final goodbyes. First, the FBI has finally broken its silence, putting its official role in this investigation, in writing, on the record, in full. Second, the young woman who stands at the absolute center of this case's biggest unresolved contradiction has bypassed all the internet noise and spoken directly, face-to-face, with Nolan's own mother. Third, somewhere in the background of this tragedy, a family connected to this matter has become the target of an actual, verified threat, one serious enough that cross-border federal resources are now actively deployed to handle it. And fourth, the ultimate human cost of this story becomes reality today, as a funeral meant to be an intimate ritual of grief is broadcast live across the country to thousands of strangers who have spent weeks treating this family's real-world nightmare as a digital mystery to be solved. Before the nation watches that live stream unfold today, we're stepping back to do what the internet has consistently failed to do over the past fortnight. We're going to act as an absolute sieve for this story, meticulously separating what is officially documented and verified by law enforcement from the rampant speculative fiction circulating on social media. For weeks, the question of why federal agents were walking the beaches of Horn Island was answered only in fragments, a rumor here, a defensive comment there. This morning, everything changes. We have the actual public statement from the FBI's Jackson field office, and we have the raw breakdown of what Nolan's mother, Christine, discovered when she finally sat down with the last person known to have spoken to her son. We are going to expose the massive gap between public perception and forensic reality, opening the hood on an active interstate terror investigation that is running parallel to this tragedy. The speculation ends here. The documented record begins now. For weeks, the intense public speculation surrounding the exact reason why the FBI was walking the shoreline of Horn Island had only been answered in frustrating, highly defensive fragments. A brief line in a local article here, an anonymous law enforcement comment there. The void left by that official silence allowed a highly polarized internet echo chamber to construct its own sweeping narratives. This morning, however, the landscape of this case has fundamentally shifted. The Bureau's Jackson field office has officially put its role in this investigation in writing, releasing a complete, on-the-record public statement that deserves to be analyzed in its entirety. The statement explicitly notes that while the FBI has actively assisted with specific elements of the investigation, deploying federal tools and robust partnerships that have already proved highly valuable, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the absolute lead agency and will continue to dictate the direction of this case. The Bureau describes a deeply trusting, collaborative relationship between its federal field agents and Jackson County authorities, one built over many decades of working side by side on complex regional cases. It notes that federal assets have been quietly supporting local investigators since day one, driven by a unified objective to gather verifiable information and secure definitive answers for the Wells family and the broader Mississippi community. The statement closes by emphasizing that the FBI remains fully prepared to provide further specialized assistance, particularly when federal resources can scale up local capacity to bring clarity and peace of mind to the people who love Nolan. When analyzing this text, it is critical to pause on the explicit tone of the statement, because in a case as volatile as this one, the rhetoric matters just as much as the baseline content. This document is not an aggressive press release announcing a massive procedural breakthrough, a dramatic escalation, or a dynamic tactical shift. Instead, it reads almost entirely as a careful, highly measured reassurance. It is a piece of corporate law enforcement prose designed precisely to lower the temperature around a question that had been fueling intense societal anxiety and digital panic for days. This institutional restraint may leave a curious public with far fewer details than they desire, but it is a conscious, protective legal strategy, not an attempt to downplay the gravity of the intimidation occurring behind the scenes. Separating verified facts from high-velocity rumor requires rigorous, disciplined research, especially when the stakes are this high for a grieving family. If you value this level of clear-eyed, documented journalism, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Every single engagement tells the algorithm that this is accurate, deeply researched content, which directly helps us bypass the sensationalized noise and push these verified facts to a much larger audience. By subscribing, you ensure you won't miss a single development as we continue to track this case to its ultimate conclusion. You can trust this channel to stay on the ground, filter out the speculation, and deliver the raw record exactly as it is confirmed by official sources. The directors at that regional field office clearly recognized that leaving federal involvement completely unexplained was doing far more to weaponize public suspicion than to protect the integrity of the investigation. They deliberately chose to put their parameters in writing rather than allowing rampant rumors to continue filling the information gap. Up until this statement dropped, the internet had populated that vacuum with two radically competing, highly damaging theories. One camp treated the physical presence of federal badges as definitive proof that the underlying case had been quietly escalated behind closed doors to a severe cross-border homicide probe. The opposing camp viewed the Bureau's proximity as evidence of a massive, active institutional cover-up, falsely claiming that federal agents had stepped in to aggressively manage the public narrative and shield local interests, rather than to follow the raw forensic trail. This official text completely dismantles both of those extreme interpretations. It establishes meaningful, specialized federal involvement, specifically centered around digital forensics and technical partnerships, while drawing a firm line in the sand. Jackson County has maintained command from the beginning to the present hour. It is an architecture of support, not a transfer of command. This is a foundational distinction that must govern every single public discussion of this case moving forward. It is equally vital to interrogate why this specific clarification required more than 2 weeks to materialize. As a matter of strict institutional policy, federal agencies are notoriously reluctant to offer public commentary on active, ongoing investigations. The fact that the FBI chose to break that rigid bureaucratic pattern here, issuing an explicit, on-the-record public document rather than hiding behind a standard no comment, proves they recognized the profound real-world danger that this structural ambiguity was causing. In an investigation completely saturated with deep-seated historical and racial tensions, silence from an agency like the FBI does not read to the public as a neutral, protective stance. It reads as a passive confirmation of whatever conspiracy theory happens to be circulating loudest on social media timelines. Choosing to speak out, even within these highly guarded parameters, was a calculated institutional decision, and it is one that deserves objective credit, even as we remain clear-eyed about what this document does not confirm. Buried directly within the heart of this public statement is the precise legal trigger that pulled federal resources into this Mississippi tragedy in the first place. The FBI explicitly states that its field efforts have been sharply focused on investigating severe interstate threats received by specific individuals connected to this matter, and that this digital threat work is running in an entirely parallel track to the local death probe, not merged into it. This is the single most definitive official confirmation of a dark reality we have tracked from the beginning. The primary mechanism of federal intervention here is not a direct consequence of Nolan's physical passing on that island. It is an immediate response to an escalating campaign of cross-border terror and intimidation targeting people tied to this story. The legal phrase, interstate threats, carries immense statutory weight, and it requires a brief, precise breakdown to understand why the FBI is executing this parallel track. For an act of intimidation to instantly transform into a severe federal crime by virtue of crossing state lines, it means an individual located in one state utilized a channel of foreign or interstate commerce, chief among them the internet, cellular networks, or cross-border mail infrastructure, to transmit a serious threat of injury or violence to a recipient located in an entirely different state. This is exactly the kind of borderless digital warfare that the Bureau's cyber and violent crime units are fundamentally engineered to track down and prosecute. It does not require the local sheriff's department to classify Nolan's death as foul play for the FBI to assert its jurisdiction over these threats. It only requires that a digital actor used interstate networks to terrorize someone connected to this timeline. But here is the line where our analytical filter must become incredibly precise. The FBI statement does not disclose the specific text of those threats, nor does it name the exact identities of the individuals who received them. Independent reporting from major media outlets like TMZ has noted that it remains entirely unclear from the official record what the exact nature of these communications was, or who was on the immediate receiving end. This information gap is highly significant because separate, entirely unofficial online reports have spent days circulating highly graphic, detailed claims about violent text messages supposedly sent to a specific family connected to one of the boys who was present on that boat. We must enforce an absolute distinction here. We know as in verified official fact that serious interstate threats occurred and that federal cyber resources are actively tracing them. We do not possess official verification of the specific graphic contents of those threats or the exact names of the civilian families targeted. Both realities exist simultaneously this morning, and conflating them does an immense disservice to the truth. There is a deliberate, protective reason why official law enforcement statements remain resolutely vague on these precise details, even when the underlying criminal activity is severe and real. Naming specific victims or republishing explicit violent language in a public federal document can instantly inflict further psychological trauma, drawing a fresh wave of public scrutiny and online harassment directly toward the vulnerable individuals the investigation is actively trying to shield. Furthermore, premature disclosure can deeply compromise the digital forensics and tracking measures being deployed to identify and arrest the anonymous authors of these threats. This institutional restraint may leave a curious public with far fewer details than they desire, but it is a conscious, protective legal strategy, not an attempt to downplay the gravity of the intimidation occurring behind the scenes. The development that alters the structural shape of this case more than anything else this week centers on the second pillar of our title. Katie, the young woman who spent time talking with Nolan Wells during his final confirmed minutes alive on that beach, has finally been heard from directly. This is not another third-hand summary originating from a relative's social media page, but the result of an actual face-to-face, in-person meeting with Nolan's own mother, Christine Wells. According to Christine, she and Katie sat down together in a quiet, direct setting, away from the digital noise. Christine has stated plainly to the public that what Katie shared with her during this encounter does not match the prevailing narrative she has been forced to hear from almost everyone else since this nightmare began. This direct meeting represents a profound, fundamental shift from where the investigation stood even 7 days ago. Up until this point, every single piece of information attributed to this critical witness had arrived through a series of frustrating, highly filtered intermediaries. First, the public received a version of her account via a family friend who publicly relayed what she claimed to have heard secondhand. Later, when internet rumors began to spiral out of control, Katie's own mother and sister took to Facebook to post frantic corrections, attempting to shield the young woman from an avalanche of online accusations. Each of those historical accounts was understandably distorted, filtered through someone else's memory or protective instinct, rather than flowing cleanly from the one person who possesses direct, first-hand knowledge of Nolan's final confirmed words on that shoreline. This face-to-face sit-down changes the dynamic entirely. This is, as far as the record shows, the first time information regarding that critical beach conversation has traveled straight from the person who lived it to the mother who desperately needs to understand it, with no digital filters or protective relatives standing in between. Because the stakes are so high this morning, we must walk through the anatomy of Katie's actual account with extreme care. The details are highly specific, and crucially, they are far more limited than a hyper-reactive public conversation has led people to believe. According to Christine's own description of the meeting, Katie has actually been entirely consistent from the very beginning of this process. She confirms that she and Nolan met on the sand that day, spent an extended period talking and interacting, and eventually parted ways. Katie then walked away to board a boat containing her own circle of friends, a vessel completely separate from Nolan's group. She explicitly noted that based on the conversation they had just finished, she fully assumed Nolan was walking back down the beach to rejoin his own friends on their boat. Here is the precise detail where the audience must lean in close, because it is the single most critical nuance in the entire timeline. Katie never actually saw Nolan physically step onto that boat. She assumed he did so based on the clear intentions he had expressed to her moments prior, but she did not personally witness him rejoining his friends or boarding that craft. This distinction is not a minor semantic detail, it is a massive evidentiary reality. It means that Katie's direct account is not a flat eyewitness contradiction of the friend's timeline, in the sense of her physically seeing one event occur while they claim another. It is closer to an exposure of an unverified window of time. Nolan stated a clear intention to her. Whether he actually executed that intention before whatever tragedy transpired next is something that absolutely nobody, Not Katie, not the friends on the boat, and not the family can currently confirm with a single piece of first-hand physical evidence. Both things can technically be true at different intervals. Nolan could have expressed a genuine, absolute desire to leave the island while speaking to Katie, and an entirely different set of circumstances or decisions could have unfolded on that beach immediately after she walked away. We need to look closely at why this vital nuance got so completely flattened and erased by public coverage and social media creators over the past fortnight. A clean, dramatic contradiction, a narrative where one witness says black and another says white, makes for a far more compelling, high-engagement headline than an honest account built around an assumption of intent. But Katie's true position, as directly relayed by Christine, is far more measured and careful than the internet's version. She is not claiming she stood on that shoreline and watched Nolan walk into a hostile situation on a boat. She is simply stating that he told her a specific plan and she had every logical reason to believe he was going to execute it. That is a completely different category of testimony than a direct eyewitness denial of the friend's timeline, and it must be treated with appropriate journalistic care rather than being collapsed into a sensationalized headline. What this breakthrough meeting actually accomplishes is a total reframing of what needs to be forensically explained in this investigation. If Katie's account of Nolan's demeanor and stated plan is accurate, the central mystery of this case is no longer a simple debate over whether Nolan wanted to leave that beach. The true, haunting question is what occurred in the completely silent, undocumented gap of time between him stating that intention to Katie and the moment he disappeared. It is a terrifying blank space in the timeline, a window that, as of this morning, as the community gathers for his service, no investigator, no timeline, and no public record has been able to account for. Operating directly behind the high-stakes personal breakthroughs and the parallel federal threat investigations is a massive, highly complex legal and forensic apparatus. This morning, as the first notes of the service begin to play in Ocean Springs, the machinery of justice is moving along multiple distinct tracks at once. For anyone attempting to follow this case accurately, it is incredibly easy to lose sight of just how many separate institutional gears are grinding in tandem right now. To map this accurately, there are 5 entirely separate processes running concurrently. 1. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department's primary investigation under Sheriff John Ledbetter. 2. The District Attorney's Office, which is actively coordinating a future grand jury referral following a pivotal July 15th meeting between Nolan's parents and DA Angel Mears-Morath. 3. The Wells family's independent investigative team, heavily staffed by elite former law enforcement officers and retired federal agents retained by civil rights attorney Ben Crump. 4. The official state autopsy, which was conducted the Tuesday immediately following the recovery of Nolan's body. And 5. The entirely separate, independent secondary autopsy being conducted by medical experts in Washington, D.C. Every single one of these tracks operates on its own independent timeline, utilizes its own distinct set of forensic specialists, and answers to entirely different legal standards for what constitutes a verified fact. A breakthrough or a delay in one track does not automatically dictate the timeline of another. For instance, while Sheriff Ledbetter has been fiercely direct about what his agency owes this community, stating unequivocally that the Wells family deserves an exhaustive, purely factual investigation, his team cannot force the state or independent medical examiners to accelerate their highly sensitive laboratory work. As of this broadcast, both critical autopsy reports remain pending, leaving a massive forensic void at the center of the death probe. This institutional drag has created real friction regarding the upcoming grand jury referral. The announcement that the case would head to a grand jury has not been received as a universally positive news by those monitoring the case. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has publicly sounded an intense alarm, pointing directly to DA Angel Mears-Morath's specific institutional track record. Moore highlighted a previous high-profile case involving a fatal police shooting where he argues overwhelming evidence was presented, yet the DA's office ultimately failed to secure an indictment. He has argued aggressively that the public must not mistake a grand jury referral for automated progress or a guarantee of justice, warning that a referral can sometimes be used to quietly stall a volatile case away from public view. Conversely, attorney Tyler Bailey has offered a far more stabilizing, procedural interpretation of this move. Bailey explained that under the established legal customs of this jurisdiction, a grand jury referral is actually the standard mandatory operating routine for any death that is formally classified as unnatural, unexplained, or suspicious. In his view, the referral is not a dramatic signal that foul play has been officially confirmed or even heavily suspected by local detectives. It is simply the execution of ordinary criminal procedure. Both of these legal perspectives are worth holding at once this morning. Judge Moore's skepticism is born from real, documented regional history with this specific prosecutor's office, while Bailey's explanation is grounded in the daily reality of local court mechanics. The ultimate test of this case will not be the referral itself, but the completeness of the evidence the Sheriff's Department and independent investigators actually delivered to those citizens once they're impaneled. Crucially, Ben Crump's team has confirmed that a massive digital pivot is occurring simultaneously, a highly coordinated joint review of Nolan's cell phone. Rather than competing over the device, independent tech experts and state law enforcement will sit down together to examine the raw extraction data side by side. This digital forensics review is designed to systematically replace the unverified media clips that originally derailed public perception. To understand why this forensic review is so vital, we have to look back at the two viral ghosts that heavily distorted public belief over the last 2 weeks. The first was a photograph showing Nolan at a crowded pool party, which hundreds of thousands of online commentators weaponized as absolute proof that he was alive and well long after the 4th of July. Investigative journalists eventually pulled the raw image metadata and, alongside direct statements from Nolan's close friend, Traken Shepard, confirmed that the photo was actually captured on June 27th, a full week before Nolan ever stepped foot on Horn Island. The second piece of viral misinformation was an audio recording that millions believed captured Nolan in a fierce, screaming argument on the sand shortly before he vanished. Traken Shepard has since broken his own silence to explicitly clarify that the voice captured on that recording belongs entirely to him, not Nolan. Both of these massive structural corrections trace right back to the exact same underlying pattern. In the dark vacuum created by 2 unfinished autopsies and a lack of early official commentary, unverified digital claims will consistently outpace and out-hustle verified facts. As the joint phone review begins, it will treat every text, timestamp, and cell tower ping with the same objective filter, systematically destroying internet mythology in favor of documented forensic reality. The doors of Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs are fully open now. The morning visitation window is coming to a close, and the pews are filled with coaches, teammates, neighbors, and friends. Outside the sanctuary, the broader community has rallied around the Wells family with an unexpected display of institutional grace. In the days leading up to this morning, the commissioners of the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center voted unanimously to offer their massive public venue for this service entirely free of charge. Though the family ultimately chose the more intimate setting of Centerpoint Church, the Coliseum's response was remarkably warm, issuing an official statement affirming their complete solidarity with the family's choice and their ongoing commitment to supporting the community through this dark hour. But as the opening remarks begin and Reverend Al Sharpton prepares to step to the pulpit, the profound, agonizing duality of this day becomes absolute. A funeral is, in almost every ordinary human circumstance, one of the most sacredly private, intimate rituals a family ever endures. A closed circle of devastating grief shared exclusively with those who actually knew and loved the person inside the casket. This morning, however, is the structural opposite. By order of the family's representatives, the entire service is being broadcast live across the country, streamed directly onto web pages and YouTube channels to an audience of hundreds of thousands of strangers. Think about the immense psychological weight of that reality for a moment. The very same online public that has spent the last 16 days aggressively debating GPS coordinates, trading unverified theories, and circulating graphic rumors is now invited inside the sanctuary. They are looking directly at a real mother and a real father forced to survive one of the worst moments a parent can face. It forces a national audience to finally confront the true human cost of the mystery they have been tracking on their screens. What is unfolding in Ocean Springs today is not the next chapter of an ongoing internet true crime series. It is a real funeral for an 18-year-old boy whose life was cut short. Christine Wells has stated clearly that today's service was designed intentionally to celebrate who Nolan actually was, his energy, his athletic drive, his character, rather than to allow the entire morning to be consumed by the dark clouds of suspicion and sorrow that have otherwise defined the past 2 weeks. Yet it is impossible to ignore the heavy irony of the timing. Every major development we have deconstructed today, the FBI's sudden public statement on interstate terror, the revelation of Katie's face-to-face meeting with Christine, and the parallel tracking of digital threats, landed in the final chaotic hours leading up to this service. This means that as Nolan's parents stand before his casket today, they are forced to carry every single one of these massive, unresolved legal threads with them into the church. Grief in this case has never been granted the luxury of existing on its own terms, separate from the noise of the street. Today will not change that, even if the service provides a brief sanctuary of peace. When we look across the entire landscape of this case on this Monday morning, the true shape of the crisis becomes clear. Every single line of movement we have tracked represents a different vital institution or human relationship being pushed to its absolute limit at the exact same time. We see a federal law enforcement agency forced by public outcry to break its rigid policy of silence and explain itself on the record. We see a young woman forced to become a central high-stakes witness in a public tragedy she never asked to touch. We see families forced to live under the active shadow of cross-border intimidation serious enough to draw federal cyber units. And we see a grieving family forced to navigate the rawest depths of human loss under a national microscope. The past few days have not given us the ultimate answer to how Nolan Wells died, but they have given us something else, a completely transformed case. 2 weeks ago, this story was entirely controlled by anonymous internet claims and viral videos stripped of their context. Today, the record is far more grounded, documented, and fiercely honest about what remains unknown. Behind the walls of Centerpoint Church, the service is underway, but outside those doors, the machinery of justice does not pause for a single hour. The joint phone forensic review is beginning. The dual autopsies are still grinding through laboratory analysis, and the grand jury path sits directly on the horizon. We are staying on this case through the conclusion of today's service, through the final medical examiner reports, and through every legal turn that follows. We will bring you the verified facts exactly as they are documented, and not a single second before.